I'm Carlos Correa. Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. On the program, Emilio Gutierrez, a journalist from Mexico who seeks political asylum in the United States. We'll talk to him about his remarkable career and the challenges he faced reporting the news across the border. Plus, Molloy from New Mexico State University is here to help tell Emilio's story, and we'll ask her about tracking Ciudad Juarez. But first, community members in Las Cruces are coming together to form a committee called Amigos de Emilio, raising awareness about the drug war that has left Mexico devastated with more than 45,000 victims of murder. On a warm New Mexico afternoon in the historic town of Mesilla, a group gathers for Emilio Gutierrez, one of the many victims of threats and violence across the border in Ciudad Juarez, where more than 900 people have been murdered this year alone.
It is a huge pain that we carry inside of us every single day when we think of the huge number of victims in Mexico.
Ciudad Juarez is one of the fastest growing cities in the world, and because of the ongoing drug war, it's also become the most violent place outside declared war zones. According to journalists, more than 45,000 murders have taken place over a 6-year period. There have also been more than 15,000 kidnappings, 68 of which have been members of the media.
This bloodshed in Mexico has come about because we have an illegitimate presidency there. It is corrupt to the very marrow of its bones.
Gutierrez, a reporter for El Diario, a major daily newspaper, was forced to flee his country in 2008 after writing a series of articles criticizing the Mexican army. Gutierrez seeks political asylum in the United States.
From the very beginning, the U.S. government has been hostile towards Emilio, locking him up for 7 months. Unheard of.
Carlos Spector is an El Paso lawyer specializing in immigration cases. He represents Emilio Gutierrez and has become an advocate for other members of the Mexican media.
To be a journalist in Juarez or in Mexico, especially Juarez, is probably one of the toughest jobs in the world at this point. And they have to maneuver death and threats on a constant basis.
Lawyers say a routine asylum case is resolved anywhere between 6 and 9 months, but Emilio Gutierrez's case has been open for about 4 years. Spector points to the United States government, saying officials are just dragging their feet on the matter.
They refuse to make a decision which would acknowledge that the Mexican military has been hostile towards the Mexican press in the name and face of Emilio Gutierrez.
Recently, neighbors, friends, and members of the Las Cruces and El Paso community formed a committee called Amigos de Emilio.
We decided to form this committee because we've been involved and made friends with Emilio, and because of that, knew of a lot of issues and problems and that he and his son had, social, all sorts of issues that people, exiles, have when they come here. And we had been working on some of these issues.
One of the first demands of the committee is to send a message to the National Commission for Human Rights in Mexico, pressuring it to release copies of Emilio Gutierrez's files and to resolve his 2005 complaints against the Mexican military.
To this date, they haven't responded to him. If they've made a recommendation, they refuse to give him copies of it.
The newly formed committee includes other members of the Mexican media, including Ricardo Chavez Aldaña, a radio journalist who says his vehicle was burnt down and his 2 nephews murdered after he made comments about the military on his program. He's also seeking political asylum.
Juarez is in constant mourning. It's bathed in blood. The city practically does not exist anymore.
Lawyers like Carlos Spector are convinced that tactics used on many exiles are designed towards discouraging people from continuing with the process of seeking political asylum. Amigos de Emilio plan to keep a close watch on similar cases in the area.
My vision is to have a core group of people that are very committed to the cause in general, the cause of exiled journalists, and to Emilio's cause in particular. And I want us to kind of become experts in problem solving and know where the resource people are in our community that we can go to and say, well, we have this situation. Can you help us? What can you do to help us? And what can we do to help that situation? So we're just very problem solving oriented, you know, and we'll stay together as long as we feel there's a need.
I'm sure many members of that committee have a lot of work ahead of them. I want to welcome Emilio Gutierrez and Molloy to the program. Bienvenidos.
Gracias.
First, let's talk about Emilio, your career. What got you interested in being a journalist?
En términos de tu carrera, ¿por qué te interesaba en el periodismo?
Me imagino que es algo nato, la intención y el perfil para buscar este oficio que es muy noble. Siento que nació desde adolescente, en nivel medio superior. Siempre me relacioné con los periódicos estudiantiles, entonces yo pienso que así es como nace la inquietud por formalizar este trabajo.
I think I was sort of born to it. I got involved in student publications when I was in high school, and I just kept going and studying journalism and practicing it. It seemed to just come natural to me.
And we know that you worked at El Diario in Mexico. Tell us why you decided to work at that specific publication.
Que trabajaste en El Diario en México. ¿Por qué trabajaste ahí?
Era la empresa más cercana para iniciar una carrera periodística. En los años 80 el diario se establece en Nuevo Casas Grandes y yo afortunadamente ingreso como el primer reportero de la ciudad y en ese medio.
This was the easiest place for me to work. It was very close to where I lived in Nuevo Casas Grandes. El Diario opened up a bureau in Nuevo Casas Grandes in the early 1980s, and so that's where I got my start.
At the time that you started working at the newspaper, was Juarez the way it is now, or was it just beginning?
Cuando empezaste a trabajar en El Diario, ¿estuvo Juárez así como es ahora o no?
No.
Not at all.
Realmente era una vida feliz.
It was a happy life at that time.
Podías transitar por Juárez, por todas las calles, a todas horas, y no había problema.
You could travel through Juárez, any street, any part of town, and there really wasn't any problem at any time of day or night.
En ese tiempo era Juárez de mis amores.
In this time period, it was Juárez de mi amores. It's like saying it was a place that I loved.
And when you started seeing the violence, did it ever occur to you that something bad might happen to you?
Cuando empezó la violencia recientemente, ¿te ocurrió entonces que algo te hubiera pasar?
Realmente sí. Yo trabajaba en una región un tanto agreste y sobre todo en donde siempre ha sido un corredor de drogas.
Yes, actually the area where I worked, the region where I worked, is a place where I did think that something could happen to me. It's a place where there is a lot of drug trafficking activity, and there has been for a long time.
Y un área donde los secuestros siempre han sido parte de la vida de esa área del noroeste de Chihuahua.
The northwestern part of Chihuahua, where I worked, where Nuevo Casas Grandes is a place where there had often been kidnappings and other kinds of activities.
Hubo que trabajar con mucho tacto y evitar una relación con grupos de delincuentes que de todos modos los tienes que saludar, te los encuentras en las calles y están identificados en comunidades tan pequeñas.
I had to work with a lot of care, take a lot of precautions. One of the reasons is that there are people in these small towns where I was working that everyone knows that they're working or they're part of narco-trafficking organizations, but you can't avoid seeing them because you basically have to say hello to them on the street. They're part of the community.
Now, immigration lawyer Carlos Correa, who represents you and other Mexican media, said that being a journalist in Mexico is one of the most dangerous jobs around. And I myself have been had a gun pointed at me in my career. And what type of threats did you get when you were telling those stories in Ciudad Juarez?
Si puede explicar un poco de las amenazas que recibiste como parte de tu trabajo periodístico.
Bueno, una acción de Estado en donde buscó un barrido de todas las personas que no estaban acordes con su forma de gobernar, sobre todo en los últimos 10 años, motivó que una limpia entre todas las personas y en donde el miedo se empezó a reflejar en los rostros de todos los periodistas, sobre todo, y derechohumanistas.
Several years ago, there began what was essentially kind of a sweep by government forces, law enforcement, military, through this area, looking for people who were not in agreement with certain government policies. And at that time, as journalists, we had to be very, very careful as to what we said and how we said it in order not to get on the wrong side of these authorities.
El actual gobierno, que ha sido cuestionado por su legitimidad, necesitaba un punto de apoyo de fortaleza, entonces buscó el apoyo con los militares.
This government, which there are certain questions about the current government of Mexico as far as whether it is legitimate or not, this government at the time, this would have been in about 2008, early 2008, was looking for a way to strengthen its position in Chihuahua, and they used the military to do that.
Y ya con el acuerdo con militares, hubo que utilizar a los militares. ¿Y cómo? Inventando una guerra en donde no se conocía al enemigo.
And really what happened was, in a sense, they invented a war. And in this war, it's very hard to determine who the enemy is.
Resultó un botín para las fuerzas militares y un derramamiento de sangre para el pueblo mexicano.
It became a real boon for the military, and sadly it became a real bloody situation, a very painful and violent situation for everybody else.
Do you remember the time where you actually said, I have to leave my job and I have to leave my life so that I can protect myself and my family?
¿Puede decir, explicar el momento en que decidiste que sí, tengo que salir de mi trabajo, tengo que salir de mi lugar, mi hogar, para salvar mi vida?
Fue un instante, nada más.
It was an instant. It was one moment.
Eran nuestras vidas o simplemente ser víctimas de esta guerra injusta.
I had to decide whether it would be our lives or this war, this unjust war.
Una guerra sin cerebro.
A war without any sense to it, without any meaning to it.
Y cuando usted entró a tu trabajo, ¿te dio miedo todos los días? Did you get scared every day?
Mira, a partir del 2005 que recibo las primeras amenazas por parte del ejército, hubo que, si así vivía con cierto tacto en la sociedad, con los grupos sociales, con los grupos de criminales, pues a partir de esas amenazas fue detener más el trabajo para empezar a conservar la vida. Sí había miedo, sí nos empezó a transformar.
As far back as 2005, when Emilio first received the threats from the military for some of the things that he had written in the newspaper, he did start to hold back, to not write as much, to not be as outspoken in his articles about the actions of the military. So the fear and the change in the way he did his job happened that far back.
Was there a certain story that when your editor said, I need you to cover that, you said no?
Había momentos en que cuando los editores quisiera que cubriste alguna historia o algún evento específico que tú tenías que decir, no puedo.
Siempre pude, siempre lo hice, aunque era sometido obviamente a mis jefes. Mire, tengo esta nota, es muy fuerte, pero tiene estos antecedentes y esta puede ser la consecuencia, ¿qué es lo que hacemos? Sí hubo información que fue censurada.
It was always possible to cover a story, to go somewhere and cover the story, but at the time of getting the story written and published in the paper, there was always some give and take with the editors, explaining what the dangers were and a kind of a decision-making process as to what would get into the paper and what would not.
Incluso por intereses muy propios de la empresa para la que trabajaba, en ocasiones no se publicaba información.
And for the very interests of the newspaper where I worked, there were times when certain information would definitely not be published.
Let's talk a little bit about when you left Mexico. Tell me from that point on, you and your son were put in jail.
Hablamos un poquito de cuando tú y tu hijo salieron de México, que estaban detenidos. Si pueden contar un poco de esto, lo que pasó.
Bueno, cuando después de escondernos 2 días en un rancho en Ascensión.
When we first decided to leave, we hid for a couple of days at a ranch outside of the town of Ascensión.
Y que teníamos que salir en busca de la preservación de la vida.
We had to figure out how we were going to save our lives.
Haz de cuenta que pusimos una moneda en el aire.
We basically flipped a coin.
Un albur. Y a transitar por un camino de terracería para poder llegar a la frontera.
And we decided to go along a back road, a dirt road, all the way to the border.
Momentos muy tensos.
And it was very, very tense at that time.
Y al cruzar la frontera, pues cuál sorpresa, ¿no?
And when we finally crossed the border, it was a huge surprise what happened to us then.
Unas esposas en las manos.
They put handcuffs on us.
Para mi hijo y para mí.
For both of us.
Cárcel para mi hijo por 2 meses y medio.
My son was in jail for 2.5 months.
Nos separan.
They separated us.
Y yo quedo por 7 meses y medio en el centro, en el Corralón, en El Paso.
And I was detained for 7.5 months in the Immigration Detention Center in El Paso, what they call the Corralón.
Si bien es cierto, creo que no se da la política humanitaria en estos casos tan delicados, también lo es que teníamos ya vida, que estábamos en otro lugar donde, aún detenidos, estábamos conservando la vida.
And we really didn't realize when we crossed that we would be detained in that way. We thought we would be treated in a more humanitarian way by the officials in the United States, but despite that, we had to leave. We had to cross the border, else we might not have been able to save our lives.
And then from that point on to now, what have you been doing, I guess, waiting on your case?
Entonces, desde que te dejaron salir de la detención, ¿qué ha pasado durante estos años mientras está esperando su caso?
Ha sido un retroceso en nuestras vidas.
There's been a real sort of backward movement in our lives. We've been sort of held up.
Fue un doble giro de 360 grados.
It was like turning around 360 degrees and going backwards.
Esperar los días de supervisión.
We have to wait for being supervised because, if I can just add, his situation is as if he's on probation now, because even though he's not in detention, he's still under the supervision of the immigration authorities.
At what point did you guys meet and become friends, and you supported his?
You want me to end? I met Emilio in early 2009. I think it was in March. It was right after his release from the detention center. Just a couple of weeks he had been out of the detention center. I met him because I was working with a reporter, Charles Bowden, who was going to write a story about Emilio's flight from Mexico and what had happened to him. We got in touch with Emilio's attorney, Carlos Spector, in El Paso, and arranged to meet with him and interview him.
Gotcha. And tell me, now, Molly, you are from New Mexico State University. But you do something else rather interesting to keep many of us informed about what's happening in Ciudad Juarez. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, sure. The violence that really broke out and exploded into a form that had not been seen before in Mexico started around January of 2008. And starting at that time, I began to sort of collect news articles on it for my own research, and also at that time, the person I was working with, Charles Bowden, was beginning to do either an article or a book. At the time, he wasn't sure about this outbreak of violence because it was something unique. It hadn't happened before. And so I started keeping track of these things, and I already had sort of a list of some other journalists and reporters and researchers who were interested in what was going on in the border region especially, and so I started forwarding these news articles. And eventually that evolved into something that I call the Fronteras List, which is a news distribution service, I guess, for people who are interested in border issues, and especially focusing on the violence in Juarez and the other nearby border areas, such as in western Chihuahua, where Emilio is from.
When you first started working on this list and recording the deaths every day, or the murders, does it surprise you that it has increased? Has it stopped? Has it
It's
slowed
definitely
down?
not stopped. It's gone up. In general, the trend has been up ever since January of 2008. There have been peaks and valleys. There have been times when the murders would go down and then rise up again to a level that they had not been before. Just to give a quick overview of the numbers, beginning in January 2008, there were about 48 or to 50 murders recorded in Juarez. The same number in February, and then in March it jumped to 117. It had never been seen before, that level of killing, even in a city like Juarez, which is known for being violent. In all of the previous years before 2008, the killings had never gone much beyond 300. At the end of 2008, the killings had reached over 1,600, so it had increased by more than 5 times. In all of 2009, the number of killings rose to 2,700 or more, a few more than that. And then in 2010, the killings rose to over 3,000. Over the number, I've seen different numbers. 3,100 is a good estimate of how many people were murdered in Juarez, although there are some numbers that say it was as high as 3,900. So we really are not sure. So far this year, 2011, there have been 925 murders in the city of Juarez in 4.5 months.
Wow. Emilio, ¿qué piensas de lo que está pasando en Ciudad Juárez ahorita? What do you think about what's happening in Ciudad Juárez?
Siento que el gobierno está negociando con los criminales.
I think that the government is negotiating with the criminals.
Is this ever going to stop? ¿Esto va a parar?
No.
Nunca?
Tal vez 20 años, no sé, pero inmediatamente, a corto plazo, no.
In the
Ya no-
short term, I don't think it will stop. Maybe in 20 years, things will even out a little bit, but not in the short term.
Uno de los principales criminales que impulsa esta guerra,
One of the main criminals that is behind this war,
García Luna, el secretario de Seguridad Pública, ya anunció que puede tardarse 7 años más. Entonces, si ellos lo perfilan como en 7 años, la ciudadanía creo que lo podemos doblar en tiempo.
the public security minister, secretary of the country of Mexico, Federico Garcia Luna, has announced that at least the war will go on for another 7 years. And so with announcements like that from the highest levels of the government, it's unlikely that things will change in the short term for the better.
What about people who may be watching who want to take part and support what you guys are doing, either being part of Amigos de Emilio or maybe taking part in signing up for your listserv? Tell us a little bit about it.
Anyone can send me an email and ask to get on the listserv, and we can provide that information during the program. And Amigos de Emilio is an organization started here in Las Cruces by some friends of Emilio's, and that organization would be very happy to have people to support. We've sponsored some fundraising events. We've sponsored just some informational events to educate the public about Emilio's situation and also the situation of other journalists who have left Juarez because of the ongoing violence and threats that they've received because of their work. So there are several reporters and journalists that I know personally who are living in this area that also need assistance, in addition to other refugees from the violence who left for other reasons rather than just their work as reporters. So there's a lot that we can do.
Great. Molloy from New Mexico State University, Emilio Gutierrez, thank you so much for being here. Gracias por estar aquí.
Gracias.
Thank you, Carlos.
And thank you for joining us. Remember, you can see this entire interview online at krwg.org. And while you're there, check out our blog, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. I'm Carlos Correa. We'll see you next time.